about that. Thanks everyone for joining us. We're really excited for today's topic. I know it's something that's of great interest to all of you, and even more broadly to the scholars across our K-12 program. We've been hearing a lot from other administrators about interest just in this topic of mentorship. And so I'm really excited to have Don Goldman join us. He has a wealth of experience across his career in this topic. So we're really happy that he's willing to share with us his wisdom and insight. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Don.
Okay, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
I'm just having trouble. The slide is so small. I can see all the people, but the slide is kind of small. Let me see if I can do that. That's better. And somebody else can deal with the slides if I say next slide.
Yeah.
Or can I?
Yes.
I can't take control.
Actually, I think Ingrid can hand it over to you if you'd like.
Yeah, that'd be good. I'm sorry for those of you trying to see me. I'm backlit here in the Harvard Student Center, so I don't want to turn around and face the crowd because I'll annoy them.
I'll just take 1 second, Don. I'll let you know.
Okay.
But you can tell me to move on if you'd like.
The student next to me already is packing up.
Actually, Don, I would have to change settings, so I can prepare that for next time because I'd have to shut down GoToMeeting and then do that. But if you just tell me advance to next slide, I'll be sure to do so. Sorry about that.
All right, so let's go to the next slide.
Okay.
So who wants to tell me who Mentor was? Which one of the really well-educated and sophisticated fellows knows who Mentor was? Nobody in any of my classes has ever known, so don't be too intimidated. I could ask Chris. Chris is a very sophisticated guy. Chris, who's Mentor?
Mentor is the person on the right-hand side of the slide.
Yeah, that's good. I have a slide at the end on what to do when somebody asks you a question you can't answer, and doing a Tai Chi like that is perfectly fine. So a Mentor was put in charge of Telemachus when Odysseus went off and left Telemachus and his mother Penelope alone. And Mentor, however, was a feeble man of a certain age, sort of probably my age, and he wasn't felt to be vigorous enough to really provide the guidance needed. And furthermore, Telemachus was supposed to take care of Penelope's because there were many suitors who would take advantage of Odysseus's absence and try and lure her away. So Athena stepped in, the goddess Athena, and said, I will come in the guise of Mentor and provide advice to Telemachus, which Athena did. So that's where the idea that a mentor is a guide or someone to take care of another person's welfare came to be. So next slide. So why would you ever listen to me? Well, I've been doing this a long time. I've been trying to improve using quality improvement. And it's always a learning opportunity for me to learn from you, just as you may or may not learn from me. I've been lucky to have a few great mentors and role models, even in advanced stages of my career, and I'll talk about them. And I benefited from a really good mentoring program at Boston Children's, which I'll mention again in a second. Next slide. Next, please. Okay. So why does mentoring matter? Well, I'm pretty sure that lack of good mentoring is a real impediment to professional advancement, meeting personal life goals, and finding work-life balance. And particularly for women, and even more so for women of color, the lack of appropriate mentoring has been problematic for breaking glass ceilings. The literature shows there's a huge gap in mentoring of these individuals, so that means there's a great opportunity. In my view, too many people are shy about seeking mentors at any age or career stage, and if I were to go around and ask some of the folks on this call, including people like Chris, maybe he does, I don't know, but whether or not they have a mentor, most people would say they couldn't name one. They would talk about friends, teams, all kinds of things, but really couldn't name an actual mentor. And at the very least, I think any of us can benefit from the coaching that a mentor can provide. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, in most organizations, including probably yours, mentoring is seldom seen as an institutional priority. It tends to be secondary consideration on a CV for promotion and advancement. Most institutions can't tell you the depth and breadth of their programs, even if there is a program. Institutions rarely consider the mentoring needs of a diverse workforce, hopefully increasingly diverse. And in my view, these failures impair an organization's ability to sustain and grow its mission. At IHI, we've taken this really seriously now, and I think something like maybe a third of our staff of 200 or so are involved as either mentors or mentees, and it's a formal process with milestones, and we're trying to evaluate it. And that's a sea change at IHI. We didn't really take it seriously until we became diverse and realized that our staff, people of color, on our surveys were stating that their opportunities for development and their coaching for development was far less good than it was for people who happen to be white. So we felt that mentoring was obviously important if we're going to address that gap, and so we're taking it more seriously. Next slide. There are a lot of definitions for mentor, and we just quickly look at that slide and then go to the next. I happen to like the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition, but my own and IHI's are a trusted counselor, guide, a sounding board, a thought partner, and an advisor. I think that's a pretty good general definition. Next slide. So always give thanks. There's a program at the University of Wisconsin, and we've given you some links there, called Entering Mentoring, and it was funded by Howard Hughes Medical Institute for researchers. And in discussing this with Christine Fund, who's the principal there, she was very clear that this applies to translational researchers such as ourselves, and even people who just aspire to advance either in their job or academically. Boston Children's has a really good program, and one of the folks who left Children's to go to Cincinnati, Jessica Kahn, has built a beautiful program there. I think somebody's on the phone here from CCHMC. They're shaking your head up and down, and it's really great stuff, good material. So lucky for you, you probably already have a great mentor. So next slide. So matching mentors and mentees is tough. It's a painstaking process. It should be participatory. It's not, oh, we have a mentor here, here's a mentee. Prospective mentees should play an active role in making sure that their own personal needs and priorities are respected, and that therefore can inform the selection of mentors. Mentors need to be really candid with themselves about not just their own abilities and interests, but any intrinsic biases they bring to their relationship. I was thrilled recently on a search committee at Mass General for a pretty important position. I was obligated as a member of the search committee to take training on intrinsic bias, which took a couple of hours. It's not probably adequate, but it was a real warning that if you're going to attract a diverse group of people and you want to have them have a good experience, then you ought to address your own intrinsic biases, which I'm sure we all have. This is not a relationship you're locked into. Chemistry does count. You know, you can read Malcolm Gladwell, whatever you want. I mean, sometimes you just know, and sometimes you don't have a good match once you get into the relationship. So there's no guilt here. Mismatch invariably happens, and it's absolutely normal to recognize and address. Next slide. So sometimes the mentors who change your life just appear if you have an open mind and are receptive. I tried to get pictures of both these people. You know, sic transit gloria, there are no pictures of Doug Richardson, one of the great figures in neonatal epidemiology, that I could find on the internet. There are pictures of awardees for the prize that was founded in his name, but amazingly, there are no pictures of Doug Richardson, which I think is tragic, actually. So I'm always going to call people out. Jonathan Freeman was a epidemiologist, infectious disease and chronic disease epidemiologist, and when I brought him my first study, which was a chart review of over 250 patients looking for risk factors for coagulase negative staph bacteremia. I'm just going to take a sip of water because I'm getting over a cold. I'm actually over it, but I'm not perfectly there yet. So he looked at my data and he said, the good news is this is great data. The bad news is you have no idea how to analyze it. And I won't go into any detail about what he made me go through to really understand the data. But what the lesson here is he was also, in a subtle way, mentoring me, not as a complete life coach, but there was an incident that happened when this research came to fruition where a colleague had provided certain assistance and data and whatnot for the project. And he wanted to be first author. And I wanted to be first author. This paper was going in New England Journal where it actually got published. You can imagine what a boost that is to your CV to publish a epidemiology paper in the New England Journal of Medicine. And I was ready to go to war over this. And Jonathan said, you know, this means a lot to this other person. I'm sure it means a lot to you. There'll be other times, and you ought to learn that relationships are more important than whatever seems to be important in the moment. And so I passed on the first authorship, and we've been good colleagues and buddies ever since. I've gotten my share of honor. There's several other papers with this work, not in the New England Journal. I was able to say I was a co-investigator on my CV. There are many ways to deal with a situation like that, and Jonathan always was kind of a wise oracle for what the right thing to do is, not the expedient thing. Doug Richardson was involved in creating a risk score for neonatal intensive care, predicting which babies would die or have severe complications. And he always was willing to teach me and to give me full credit, which is an important attribute for a mentor. He made connections for me and got me to be actually now a quote-unquote authority on neonatal intensive care and epidemiology, even though I was trained in internal medicine. So both of these individuals are now dead. Jonathan died of a complication of bronchoscopy at the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. I think he had lymphoma and he bled to death. Doug Richardson, having fortunately kissed his wife and having them both say, I love you, and she said, bicycle safely, was hit by a garbage truck in Brookline and killed on the spot. So I show these people to honor them, but also because they demonstrated certain key attributes of mentoring. Next slide. And then sometimes they just appear in what appear to be minor roles, but actually are very significant. David Nathan, one of the great figures, actually, of translational research in hematology, very much involved in elucidating thalassemia and its etiology and treatment, was kind of looking out for me. He was the person, the head of my promotions committee to professor. And I don't know why the heck he cared about me. I mean, who am I? There were 100 people coming up for professor at Harvard. But he called me up on a Sunday and said, how come you didn't put the Janeway Award on your CV? I said, I didn't. He said, yeah, the Janeway Award is really important recognition of teaching. You've got to put that on. And I said, wow, that's amazing that David Nathan, one of the most famous pediatricians in the world, cared enough to point this out to me. This is a reminder to those on the video here, please keep your CVs up to date. Whenever you do something important, update your CV that week so that you don't come up for the ultimate reward of academia. We can talk about whether it really is the ultimate reward or a curse, but you're likely to forget the things that are really important unless you keep it up. I'm going to just take a moment. I'm going to turn around, actually, and there. I think I can do this better. Let me just get my watch. I want you to be able to see me. Can you see me? Is that better? Do I look relaxed in this wing chair? Good. Okay, I don't think I'm annoying anybody too much. I think they all have little earbuds in their ears. Next slide. Oh, before I leave that, I'm sorry. Go back. So there's David again. He was walking out of the Countway Library one day with a colleague, and I was walking out of Countway Library, and at that time I had been asked to apply for the head of the entire clinical research program at Boston Children's. It was a new effort, really expanded, big deal. I applied, and the job was given to somebody from Penn, actually, who, if I were to evaluate it fairly, probably had a better CV than I did for that purpose. But I was pretty upset, as you can imagine. Felt rejected. I'd been asked to apply. But in truth, I really didn't want that job. In fact, I woke up, if ever you wake up at 4 a.m. sweating about something you've applied for and anxious, you probably didn't want to apply for it. But I did, because I was asked to, and it was a great job with lots of span of control and opportunity. So David says to his colleague, hold on a minute, I'll just call him John. I need to speak to Don Goldman. And David Nathan, who again is kind of watching out for me, the way Athena did for Telemachus, comes over and puts his arm around me, which is a sign of affection I hadn't really expected from somebody of that fame. And he said, you know, Don, I'm sure that you're really disappointed that you didn't get that job. You must be, if I may say, crushed. And I said, yeah, you know, I'm really, really upset about it. Actually, I was asked to apply and I feel rejected. And he said, well, you know, let me just tell you, that was not the right job for you. Here's what you're good at. And he happened to list the things that I think I really do love to do and I'm good at. And he said, I don't think you'd have been that happy and maybe not even as good as you might want to be in the job directing a large clinical research program. It's administrative, and he went on. And that was so soothing. It was unbelievable. It was like a balm that a man of that stature would take the time to talk to me about something that I was disappointed about for all the wrong reasons. Next slide, please. So here's some characteristics of prized mentors. And you're going to have these slides, so I'm just going to whip through them, but some I'll emphasize more than others. Obviously, they have to be committed to you, and they have to be knowledgeable, but they don't have to be content experts in your area of research. They can find other people, you can find other people to help you with that, but it's not necessary that they know everything about neonatal intensive care epidemiology, for example. They know their own limitations and are willing to collaborate with others who can help you with content. In our fellowship at Children's, for our T32 trainees, we always have a core mentor and a content mentor who work as a team, but it has to be a real team. They have to be really good listeners, and they have to value the lived experience of mentees. And I didn't really fully realize this until Jacqueline Hunt, who was a fellow at IHI, helped me out. She was an amazing person, a PharmD, but also an innovator and into tech and whatever. And she was being honored as one of the 50 most influential young women in IT in the country. And she invited me to the ceremony. And as I'm going over to the meeting at a hotel, she texted me. She said, I just want you to know there are only going to be you and one other man in the audience. And it's a rather small meeting, so I hope you'll be comfortable. Sorry. I knew this would happen if I kept talking. So I arrived there, and in fact, it's me and this other guy and about 100 women. And I just listened. And I never really appreciated what women go through and try and advance, either in industry or in academia. And when one woman went up, she said, you know, I've always felt that I'm an imposter. And then there's this long discussion about the imposter syndrome, which I'd never even heard of. And it was obviously very much foremost in the minds of these women. Another woman got up, she said, you know,
I was called into the chief exec's office, and he said, you know, I'm so happy we're promoting you. You're going to be the da da da. And she was really happy. She didn't think she was going to get the job, and she did. And then he went on to describe and talk about the job, and she had the courage to say to him, you know, Jim, I'm so honored. I really can't wait to take on this job. But what makes you think that I want to be like you? And I said, well, that's really interesting. That was a real teaching moment. So exposing, and now I go all the time to the women's section research meetings at Academy Health, and I've become very involved in maternal disparities and other things, kind of galvanize this idea that there's something there for me to really learn from, just from the unique experience that women have, both as moms and as in academia. Be generous with credit, as Jonathan Freeman told me, credit is infinitely divisible, and be willing to step aside. If you have a mentor who keeps putting his or her name on your papers, that's a problem. You've got to show your independence. There was a woman colleague at a Harvard department who was doing very original work in community health, and the person who had literally 400 publications from the Nurses' Health Study and so forth, kept putting his name on her paper. And finally, she couldn't get him to budge. She left. So the failure to really be willing to give credit to other people, let them become independent, is lethal, not just to the person, but to the program. Have a good mentor would be protective of your time, and that means protective of you if you're truly abused, not just physically, but academically, mentally, in one way or another. Protective of your time, protective of the pressures that people are trying to put on you. So one thing I always try and do in my mentees is to find out what the pressures are in their academic life that are preventing them from fulfilling a total life goal. And as you know, especially if you take a new job in an organization, they want you to do 7 clinical sessions and apply for grants and teach, and it's just unrealistic. So the mentor has to be there to help protect you. A good mentor should have some clout. Honestly, you don't want a mentor who has no clout. I know that's very hard-hearted, but they've got to be willing to go to bat with you. In fact, people respect them, and that means they should be well-connected. A mentor who is sitting in the bowels of Widener Library at Harvard, poring over ancient texts and doesn't know anybody outside of his department is not likely to be the kind of mentor you want. So look for somebody who has clout and is well connected. Next slide, please. And here's some components really for a good mentor-mentee relationship. An example from a fellowship. There should be personal goals that the mentee brings to the relationship. And these goals should be explicit about how they align with the organization in which you're working or don't. I just say, okay, this is really aligned with my current job, but if it's not, your personal goals can't be fulfilled in the organization, then that's time to reflect. I was speaking to a group of fellows from underserved minorities, and they were looking at what their next step was going to be. And it was perfectly obvious that they really want to be in an organization that didn't practice microaggression, that was committed to equity and so forth. And yet that was not something that they thought they could discuss. They wanted to get the quote unquote best, most prestigious job. The mentor should help forge links to these key people and resources at the organization and beyond, and help you identify, just named IHI because that's where I work, but to find developmental programs for you and to help your supervisors recognize the need for those programs to develop your own expertise. They may want to help you with external site visits and field trips or whatever. Now you may be wondering, do you all know what a driver diagram is? Everybody, how do we determine that? Do you want to just nod your head up and down if you know what a driver diagram is? So most people know what a driver diagram is. Have any of you ever done a personal driver diagram? Nobody's done a personal driver diagram. So we're not going to probably have time today. I have a little bit on this at the end. but being a personal driver diagram does make you be explicit about the goals you want to achieve, and it makes you determine the key leverage changes or skills or whatever they are that help you reach your goal. And we'll spend more time on this as the fellowship goes on, but I found it really useful. For example, IHI fellows who've been at IHI to learn how to be leaders in improvement are almost always end up going back to their organization. And so when we find out what they really have as a goal and what they think they need to succeed, there's always this driver called how to advocate and influence for, on behalf of your goals. And none of my fellows have ever felt comfortable with influencing other people. So that's a driver then, that's a gap. But we'll spend more time with that at some other point. Definitely have a schedule for check-ins with your sponsor or your mentor, whoever it happens to be. Develop and rehearse your pitch. I hope we'll have time to help you rehearse your personal pitch so you can advocate for yourself. And never mind the reentry, because that doesn't apply to you. I should have taken that off the slide. Next slide. Now, a mentor does have a role in overseeing, in a very broad sense, the research you're doing. And there are a lot of things that you will have a compact about concerning your research with your research mentor. Your mentor is, I think it's on the next slide. Let me look. I can't see an advanced slide. Yeah, so there's a difference between research or project mentoring and life course mentoring. I'm talking here in general about your life course mentor. There's a trap when that mentor tries to get too deeply into your project. You end up talking about the fact that you can't get the specimens you expected from the colleague who promised them, or you can't get the data from IT that they promised, and you spend your entire hour talking about how horrible this is and what you can do about it. That's a trap. That's not what that main mentor, life course mentor, is there for. That individual should be looking at the big picture, your overall progress. Slow progress on your part may be a tell in gambling talk that there's some personal issues in play, or that the priorities are not quite set. A good mentor has a skin in the game for the mentee, but not for the project itself. This allows for more objective assessment and a question such as, tell me again why you're doing this research. How are you feeling about the work right now? And it's really incredible when I ask that question to people coming to me who are involved in research. I'd say like 30% of the time, they can't tell me why they're doing that research. The answers might be, well, that was the data that were available. Really bad reason, right? Or, well, you know, that's what the kind of patients we take care of, so I thought we'd work on them, rather than this is what I'm doing to advance my skill set. This is what I'm doing because I'm passionate about. This is what I'm doing because I can't stand watching Black mothers die. You know, reasons that are not so, I don't know, mundane. So that's what a mentor can do, can call the question. Sometimes I'll ask a question about people who are going for a K23 or a K08. Say, why are you doing this? And it turns out they actually really don't want to write grants for the rest of their life. And they say, so I'm writing a K23 so I can write more grants. You know, something doesn't compute. So that's a mentor-mentee discussion. Next slide. There's got to be a confidentiality and trust, and there should be a compact with your mentor. The meeting and communication schedule, your goals, your actions, your milestones. Again, the personal driver diagram is a great tool. A timeline for whatever homework you decide on. I think at the end of every mentor-mentee meeting, there's invariably something that both of you may want to work on. I usually leave a list of 1 or 2 connections or things I'm going to look into, and I don't feel I've done my job if within a day I don't come back with the information. And if the mentee says, well, I'm going to work on that personal driver diagram like you told me to, then I expect to see it. So at any rate, that's the general concept here. Next slide. So here's some more detailed components. And again, you're going to have a chance to study these at some length. But many mentors and mentees tell me they didn't know these were reasonable expectations. Sorry. Nothing like hearing a loud cough over a microphone. So it is the mentor's job to help you get into local, regional, and even national presentations. And that means the mentor's buddies have to be notified that you're somebody that they support, and they should be inviting you because this is on your career development pathway. And by the way, you're really good. Publications, videos, all that kind of stuff. Making sure the mentee is the first author and counseling them on how to get in that position. I've already mentioned handing over the senior authority or even foregoing authorship if the mentor happens to be involved in the work. Same for grants and contracts. One of the most important things you can do as a mentor and what you ought to expect, if you're coming up in the world and you're an expert in, I'll use the neonatal epidemiology example again, you hope your mentor is going to recommend you for a national organization, a planning committee for the upcoming national meeting, an editorial board on one of the journals in the field. And that means the mentor ought to be reaching out, making calls and sending emails, nominating you for honors you may not have even known exist. I mean, I don't know what half the honors are on people's CVs. They look like, really? Okay, well, if it's the national blah, blah, blah of the such and such association, at least it's a bullet in your CV, and hopefully it's something actually that's important. You know, most of the people I've mentored at some point at IHI anyway, tell me that they're not going to be able to reach their goals at IHI, and will I help them think about other job opportunities? And that's perfectly okay, even if you're loyal, your mentor's loyal to your own organization. It's the sense that mentees do at some point want to move on, especially if their personal driver diagrams goals can't be achieved where they are. My usual strategy is to tell a mentee, write down your dream job if you were to stay in this organization. Bring it to the senior people in your organization. And if they can't meet those goals, then you're gone. I mean, don't say, hey, you can't meet your goals, I'm gone. No, you don't want to burn your bridge before you have a new one. But that's the kind of thing a mentor should help you do. And obviously, initiating promotion procedures, if you're in fact on an academic track and want to be promoted. Next slide. So very importantly, recognize the impact of personal life on work and encouraging work-life balance. And by the way, you're perfectly okay as a mentee to tell your mentor, what about your work-life balance? I see you're here at 4 in the morning. You know, if they have alcohol in their breath, there's probably other things you want to do to bring that to people's attention, but you should be watching for them as well. And we've talked about some of the other areas where there may be factors in play that are below the surface. There's a need here to recognize really when you're struggling. If you're struggling and your mentor doesn't know it, that's not a good thing. You have to have enough trust to say, you know, I'm really, really struggling because, well, in my case, I'm struggling today because the hot water boiler split open like a rotten walnut and put 1.5 feet of water in my basement. So it was a struggle for me today. And if there's black mold and I start wheezing with my current laryngitis, then I'll be struggling even more. And if that were to be a chronic issue, I would expect to tell my mentor, you know, if you notice I'm a little bit off today. And if the mentor is really honest, she'll say something like, you know, Don, I can see there's something going on. You don't seem to be paying your usual really rapt attention and hanging on my every word. You seem a little distracted. Again, recognizing individual goals. Not everybody wants to be famous or a professor or to write papers or contracts. And some people want to be really good followers. You know, Don Quixote had Sancho Panza. If he didn't, he'd have been dead 20 times over. So being a good follower is really important. I went to a wonderful leadership seminar at Yale for ministries of health from low resource countries. And there's a whole couple hours on being a good follower. It's really important. Respect for introverts is important. Probably half the people on this call are introverts, and it's a huge problem. I'm about to go teach after this over at Harvard College, and the whole kind of modus operandi at Harvard is get up on your 2 feet, raise your hand, speak up, be articulate, defend your point of view. Well, for an introvert, that's really, really hard and certainly exhausting. So your mentor, if you're an introvert, you ought to, first of all, bring it up. And secondly, that you ought to, or she ought to be respectful. The mentor should be encouraging you to be bold, even right out of school or training. That should nurture your risk-taking, but always have at the ready a lifeline. So to urge you to go out and take enormous risk, but not have any lifeline for you or any way out of the conundrum you've created, then that's not good. And it's okay to fail. You really ought to fail. You probably don't fail enough. You ought to fail with your risk-taking a lot, but just fail fast and fail well. Don't just hang in there pounding away at it if it's obvious that it's a lost cause, and your mentor should be pointing that out to you. Next slide. So an effective mentor would be willing to think outside of his or her own experience, should always validate what you're doing, to be supportive that way, but at the same time challenge. So this has taken me about 40 years to begin to get right. Apparently when I was a little younger, I put too many people in tears when they left my office because I was being challenging but not validating. So I tried to get a little better at that. And some of these other things you see we've already covered, but really important is to say good things about you to others. Look for opportunities to advance you. I'm constantly going around when I meet people and saying, gosh, I wish you could meet Sylvia. She's just so terrific at what we're talking about here. And even if that's not registering with that individual, these things have a cumulative force. So some of the best things that have happened to me have been because 2 or 3 people have happened to mention to the same person that Don Goldman exists and is good at something. And then when they finally meet you or an opportunity comes up, they say, wow, John said and Amy said, this Don Goldman guy, and that's a really, even if they're 2 totally inaccurate perceptions of you, 2 is much more powerful than 1. And let me see if we've covered most of these other things. Next slide. So you ought to be meeting with your mentor at least a monthly initially. That frequency can change over time, but the important thing is if you've got a team, that team has to meet together. So I have an example very recently with a woman who was doing really difficult work in implementation science. Her content mentor was a woman who runs randomized controlled trials, has 10 NIH, NIAID grants, studies asthma. It's a powerhouse. I don't know if she eats or sleeps. And I'm kind of on the implementation science side, and I don't do randomized controlled trials very often. So when she meet with this powerhouse, it was all da 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 da. There's my grandmother had a word for this, hitzadik. It was a thought that's Yiddish. It's a thought every minute, right? And when she meets with me, it's much more contemplative and whatever. And finally, we started meeting together so that the differences could be reconciled in real time and not confuse the mentee. It's okay to use brief huddles and phone calls in between, and FaceTime and Skype and all that, whatever you're using. I don't think you can do this on Snapchat. But anyway, just some sort of way of connecting. But the mentor should be really looking at any avoidances, excuses, or cancellations as problematic, and not necessarily to blame you and say, why don't you come to the meeting, but to say, what's going on? This can get difficult. I have problems with our human resources people that say, you're not a psychiatrist, you should be diagnosing people. Well, I don't want to diagnose people, but if somebody is not the same, it's a moral imperative to do something, even just to start by saying, what's going on? In our profession, suicide rate is very high. At Harvard College, there's a considerable suicide rate. When I look around the 60 students in my class, and it's the same student never paying attention, and things are always late or whatever, I'm not the individual therapist, but I do have to call the resident dean for that individual, find out if I'm the only one noticing this. And the same thing's true for your mentor, that it's their his or her job to make sure you're okay. Next slide. So here's some questions that I hope a mentor would ask you. First of all, what's your passion? What is your heart? It's my heart I'm trying to pound here. What's your heart telling you? In the past, the heart was believed to be the brain. Aristotle said the heart is the seat of intelligence, motion, and sensation. And he said, educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. And then there's some stuff here about Galen we're not going to go into. You can Galen and the four humors. I have greater faith in Aristotle, I'll try to tell you the truth. And then the next question is, what are you good at, or can you become good at it? Now, if you ask that to me, I would say, well, I know I'm never going to be a surgeon. Why is that, Don? Well, because I'm a klutz. That's another Yiddish word my grandmother used. If I have to hammer a nail into a piece of wood, I will hit my thumb. My wife did unbeknownst to me, a 1-hour video of me in my underwear trying to fix a toaster, which I was sure I could fix. And at the end of an hour, when I was so happy, I put a piece of toast in the toaster and sparks came out. So I will never be a surgeon. I will never be proficient in my hands. But there are other things I can be educated to do. I'm terrible at math, but I can be educated to understand what a good data analysis looks like, even if I can't do it myself. And then finally, what can you be paid to do? So I don't think any of us are in a position where we can work for free or want to work for free, at least not exclusively, but we have a value judgment to make. So how many of you have had somebody sit down with you in a senior role, or any role actually, and go through the economics of the career decisions you're making? Just raise and shake your head up and down if you've had that advice. Nobody. So here's a question. Maybe Chris will answer this for me. So, because he knows, he works in a pediatric hospital. So Chris, if I had chosen to go into internal medicine, infectious disease at the Beth Israel Deaconess Hospital, where I was offered a job, instead of at Boston Children's Hospital, where I was offered a job and accepted, how much more money would I have today, assuming that I wasn't a fool and spent it all?
Oh my goodness, that would be, I would say at the start, your salary delta would be about $30,000 to $40,000 per year.
Remember, no, this is back in 1975. So
all right.
Nobody
10,000.
Yeah, there you go. Good. Okay.
Yeah. And then so we have to, we're not going to go into your age, but then we have to multiply that by the number of years and inflate it for inflation. So we're probably talking about $500,000 to $650,000-$700,000.
Yeah, well, I did a rough calculation. It's over $1 million because every raise I got was on a lower base. Every dollar I invested in TIA credit was $1 less, and it was over $1 million. I'd be living in a gated community now. I'm probably voting Republican. So, but so those are the choices. And do I regret it for a moment? Not at all. I mean, it's been wonderful. I'm trained in internal medicine, but I've loved pediatrics, and so I wouldn't go back and change it. But somebody ought to be discussing it with you, right? And maybe your mentor's a good place to begin. Next slide. So this is really easily summed up in this diagram here. What's in your heart? And I made that red. This is by the way from Tracy Liu, who was a fellow at Boston Children's and now runs research in Kaiser Permanente, Northern California, huge operation. And she showed me this figure. And what's in your heart is the most important thing. To keep in your heart what your passion is, all your career is critical. So I'm about to go over to Harvard College and teach general education on infectious diseases and social injustice. And I didn't have time to even think about teaching something that brought together my my loves. History, I was a history major when I was in college, epidemiology, infectious diseases, and social justice. And year after year went by, I still wanted to do this. And finally, I think it's about 12 years ago, I tried to get a house seminar at Harvard in this basic subject. And I couldn't get it done, but finally got a freshman seminar, which went on for 8 years, and now it's a credit general education course, and it's the most fun thing I do. But it wouldn't have happened if I didn't pay attention to the unmet needs of my heart. So I really urge you to do that, even if you can't act on what's in your heart now. Keep it in mind, keep it alive. I just read a lot of history of the world, really, with infectious disease as a leverage point. I've increased my understanding and my commitment to social justice and so forth, and now I'm doing what I really love. And it doesn't have to happen today, but it has to happen sometime in your life. And then what you can get paid to do and what you're good at are secondary to that, but still important. Next slide. So we talked about the personal driver diagram and the gaps in your plan to reach your goals. How many of you have converted from the usual CV to what the people, I guess your age or younger, are doing? Do you have a backpack with all the credentials that your skills that you may not have gotten a formal course in? Is anybody doing that? Probably not. So increasingly, as you know, you can take a MOOC, right? You take the MOOC on practical improvement science at Harvard X. That goes in your backpack. I got the certificate for this MOOC. So when you look at your personal driver diagram and where you need to build your skills, start keeping track of the creds or the skills you've done. Do you have a measurable goal for your work-life balance? So Don Berwick, who's the kind of guru that started IHI, you probably heard of him, was an attending physician on my adolescent medicine ward at Boston Children's Hospital, where I ran that ward for 10 or 12 years. And he had a personal improvement project. He tracked the number of days each week he had dinner with his family. And he just started saying no because he was committed to having dinner with his family. I think his goal was 3 out of 5 work days a week. I didn't think that was a common theme, but you may know Harlan Krumholtz at Yale, a real famous cardiac epidemiologist, really unbelievable guy. I asked him to be on my scientific advisory group at IHI, and he said, I'll do it as long as I can get home and have dinner with my family because I'm keeping track of that as a personal improvement goal. So work-life balance is not some intangible thing where you say, well, we'll make it up next week, honey. It's every week, and tracking it's really important. We've talked about the financial issues. One thing a guy on an airplane suggested to me, he said, you know what, I want to find out if somebody's really true to their goals. I look at their calendar. So your mentor may ask you, let me see your calendar based on what we've been discussing. And if it says things like, met with Professor Jones about his scut work, or went to a committee meeting because I was told to. Well, I won't say that, but you can look at it and say, and there's nothing in there that shows any balance or any commitment to your goals. That's an issue. If you're a hospitalist, for example, and the only thing on your schedule are your shifts, that's a statement. And then the question is, the mentor should be asking, how do you reward yourself for just being you? And every fellow that's gone through a children's program has heard this, so you might as well hear it. You could maybe remember it. Every fall, and I've already done this, even though it's not that late in the season, I may do it again. I take off from work. I used to say I play hooky, and the HR department at IHI went nuts because they said, you can't do that. I said, what I did was I basically made it on my schedule so that one person would think I was at the other place, and the other place would think it's the other place, and I was kind of cheated actually, and I would just drive up to Algonquin, Maine. It takes me an hour and 10 minutes to get there, and in September the place is deserted. The water is actually as warm as it's ever going to be. The beach is over a mile long with low tide. It's just like endless. And I just walk up and down the beach, or I used to run, sometimes I jog, and then I reward myself with either steamed clams or a blueberry ice cream cone. Along the marginal way, you walk along the cliff over the rocks, you get to Perkins Cove, and there's a place where you get steamers or a blueberry ice cream cone. So that's nowhere on my to-do list in any way other than I want to take care of myself sometime. I always ask people, what are you most anxious about? Your mentor should say, okay, that's all great. Now, what are you really anxious about right now? And we do this at the end of the year in our fellowship at Children's, and people have great anxieties. I'll never forget this. You always learn. There was a African-American woman in the fellowship program who was a little older than some of the other people for various reasons. And she said, I'll tell you what I'm anxious about. I'm anxious about the fact that people are still trying to force me to find a husband and have a child. She said, I want to be a single woman forever. I don't want a child. I am perfectly happy. And I'm just getting so anxious that all these people are telling me to do this when actually I know that I don't. And that was her big issue. And boy, did I learn a lot there, that, just to, even in subtle ways, for a mentor to try and push you somewhere that you really don't want to go and not realize it is a problem. And often asking about anxiety is a way to get at that. Next one. I think we may be closing in here. Cultural humility is important. We've already tried to make that point. Not make assumptions about each other. Next. And again, not all relationships work out. Know when to let go. The mentor should support finding you a new mentoring arrangement. And this is absolutely critical. There's only a couple of ways to get on my bad side. One is to badmouth after a trusted relationship. I don't want to hear that such and such a mentee, this didn't come to meetings, whatever. And I would never want a mentee to say, Don Goldman just doesn't get it. Just shut up. You had a mentor-mentor relationship, it didn't work out. Just move on and don't badmouth. Nothing is worse. By the way, the only bad thing you could do, I guess, is to be a bully and a cheat. I don't like that very much. And if you call me professor or doctor 3 times and you're a student at Harvard, that's the only way you can fail my course, because I don't believe in those kinds of distinctions. Next, please. So I'm not going to go into tips for mentees. You're going to read them on your own. They are inverse of what I said about mentors doing. This is just to help you know how to deal with your mentor. Excuse me. The one thing I want to tell you now, and which I hope you'll remember, is as a mentor, I'm a living, breathing, sentient being also. And just remember that, right? And remember that your mentor has life complications, anxieties, issues, isn't perfect. And just as David Nathan did for me, it's part of your trusting relationship is sometimes just to reach out to your mentor and say, Don, I can see things aren't right. Anything I can do to help makes all the difference in the world. So let's stop there. Obviously, Gene, we didn't get to the driver diagram. I knew we wouldn't. I know in my talks I tell stories. We'll do that some other time, and I hope that was helpful.
That was fantastic, Don. Why don't we open it up and I think you shared so much insight from your own personal experience. Do folks have questions for Don? Either on his talk or even on the exercise that you went through.
Oh, the exercise. We didn't get to the networking, my views on the networking. Oh, you want me to answer that?
Sure, go.
Yeah, so if you look through the slides later, I made some comments about this exercise you did. I think it's a great exercise. But let me be clear about this. I think the idea that you will be able to develop this network of mentors magically in the era of the internet is a bit of a fantasy. A mentor can help you put together that network, but you on your own, by definition, don't have the network to make a network. You don't know what you don't know. You don't have the clout, the influence, the connections. So you look at that and then use that as a a way to look at the gaps and ask the mentor to say, given this, I don't have these kind of connections, or these are the right people, and that build that together. I think somebody's got to be accountable. A network is not accountable, as best as I can tell. If you have an alliance of nations, who's accountable? Who's actually going to say, I'm in command here, and make it all happen? So just bear that in mind. I think it's a useful exercise. I love the approach, but I don't love it that much.
Do folks, I don't know, people might be muted, but if you have a question or comments or just general thoughts, feel free to unmute yourself.
This is Suchitra here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I guess one question that I had for Don is, as a mentee, we often feel like, oh, we don't want to burden our mentors, or there's so much on their plate, or now they have, a multitude of mentees that they have now. I just wanted to hear from you and others about what the benefits are to you to have mentees throughout the years, because I think it drives home for us that it is sort of a win-win on both sides. So I would just love to hear what the big wins are for you having mentees and what you get out of it.
It's so funny, I was interviewing a hospitalist from Beth Israel Deaconess, 31-year-old woman. I had to ask her age, which is always risky to do, but she was going on about all these amazing things she'd done, and I couldn't make it compute looking at this person. I mean, how could you be a physician and a hospitalist and have worked for Peter Drucker? I mean, it was like, like she had 3 lives. So anyway, she said, so what will you look back on as the most important thing you did? And I said, wow, that's a pretty bold question. That this is a really unique individual, and it turned out it was mentoring. It was, and I told her a story. There was a fellow from the children's program who's now mid-career and very successful. We were at a reception at the Academy Health meeting for fellowship alumni, and she came up to me over pretty pathetic hors d'oeuvre, actually, in a kind of weak drink. And she came up to me, she said, Don, I've always wanted to thank you. I said, thank me for what? I couldn't imagine what I'd done. She said, well, I asked if I could schedule time with you, and I came to you, and I told you some of my anxieties about my career, and you said that there were alternatives, and you put me on a different path, and it changed my life. So that, to me, is what it's all about. And I mean, mentoring is an honor and a privilege, and ultimately extraordinarily fulfilling. The one thing in your question, though, that is a bit of a problem is lots of mentees. A mentor cannot have lots of mentees. Right now, I'm mentoring 5 people at IHI, which is 2 people too many. And it takes time. And so, unless it's a person who's devoting full-time to mentoring and they're now making that a career, which I almost am, they ought to have just 2 or 3 mentees at the most. It's a lot of work and a lot of mental burden to carry for the welfare of people. So, but it's extraordinarily fulfilling. I don't think you ever need to worry about bothering a mentor. Maybe you can relate to this, but even as an infectious disease attendant, you want to be wanted and needed. When I get called at 4 in the morning to come in and look at a malarial smear because I'm better to do it than the fellow, I grouse to my wife as I get out of bed, oh shit, I gotta go in and see it. Hilarious. But I feel so good inside that I've gone in and actually read the smear, and I know that it's falciparum malaria. For a mentor, it's even quadruple that in terms of satisfaction.
Don, we're at the top of the hour, and I know that you have to go. Yeah. But I feel like we cheated the scholars because I think they probably have more questions. So I'm wondering, Chris and Don, do we think we can make this into 2 parts? I know you want to talk about the driver diagram, and I feel like we want to give an opportunity for scholars to ask more questions and discuss.
Yeah, well, I'll always get on the call, just arrange it. But Chris has got the master plan.
Yeah, let's talk about that offline, Jeannie. I think we're going to follow up with the scholars about their mentors in general. Don talked a lot about life course mentorship, which I think is terrific. Sometimes that is your research mentor, sometimes it's not. And we also want to provide you with some mentorship outside your institution. So we're going to be following up with you individually and as a group. And I also want to say, Don provided the best talk and mentoring I've ever heard. And the fact that you shared your personal stories, Don, really brought this to life. So thank you. That's very unusual to bring such a personal touch to a topic like this. Really appreciate it.
Okay, great. Thank you. But I am going to run now.
Yep.
So otherwise,
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Trouble.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
All right.
Don. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone. We'll follow up with the slides and also some of the papers that Chris actually referenced on the first webinar. And as Chris said, we'll let you know about next steps. Thank you.
Thank you.